I hadn't played Halo Combat Evolved's Anniversary Edition from beginning to end in a long old time until very recently because frankly I'm not a fan. There is the occasional flourish that ain't half bad, but all in all it's a frustrating affair which ignores so much of the intentionality of Bungie's approach to visual storytelling especially. In amongst all the iffy aesthetic choices and other odd decisions though, there is one level which stands out from the crowd, and that my friends is the masterpiece that is 343 Guilty Spark. It's obvious from the level's very outset that Anniversary developer 343 Industries misunderstood certain elements tonally. Even with only a passing knowledge of the mission, it should be pretty obvious how far off the mark the swamp is in visual terms, with its brightness and draw distance being the biggest issues. While your inability to see into the distance or make out what's lurking around on the ridges above you might think is the result of technical limitations in the original, that isn't the case in the slightest. You can see a long way into the distance all the time in other levels, including above you when you pass through narrow areas with raised vantage points, similar to those you traverse during 343 Guilty Spark's opening minutes. Intentionality is key, and given you can see what's ahead of you or above you elsewhere on Installation 04 but you can't in the swamp, it must be assumed that the decision to limit your view was a deliberate one. And it's brilliant. Rather than significantly shrinking the game's usual play area, Bungie uses light, or a lack thereof, to make the environment more claustrophobic than it would be if it was lit like the rest of the campaign's outdoor areas. The Anniversary Edition, on the other hand, makes the swamp almost as bright as every other part of the game, and with it, much of the setting's moodiness evaporates. Where once it was as if anything could be creeping around just out of sight, suddenly there's no worry that's the case at all, as you can see everything everywhere. It's what makes your motion tracker lighting up as you walk along this log in the original so clever, as you can't see enough of what's around you to gain a solid understanding of what's going on. Yes, you can see some flood, but according to the dots on your radar, there's possibly many more out there. You just can't see them. Darkness and fog hampering your vision in the original fosters an oppressive atmosphere, whereas Anniversary's brighter take offers reassurance, which is the complete opposite outcome to what Bungie had in mind. On the topic of light and dark, these glowing stalks and the rest of the added flora are so incredibly out of place. The stalks exist in the original, sure, but then becoming bioorganic floodlights is needless, like all the other plants and trees and vines crammed in. What makes the original swamp so off-putting is that it's a desolate, empty quagmire. Anniversary's take in comparison looks like it's probably teeming with life, and actually wouldn't be too bad a place to go for a stroll. Reaching the facility itself, I also took the lift down and straight back up to check the dead marines still appear as soon as you leave. They do, although goodness knows what happened to this fella's arm. I'll save talking about the building's aesthetic until a little bit later. Spoiler alert, my comments won't be any more complimentary, but I quickly want to focus on these symbols for a moment. For starters, Anniversary's take on them looks dreadful, to the extent I'm surprised such low quality assets made it into the final product. Say what you want about how silly they look though, the bigger issue is that they no longer appear above every door in the larger areas. Sometimes they're still included, sometimes they're not, and it's a great shame as they're a nice indicator of what's nearby if you're paying attention. Green symbols mark an entrance, 2 reds denote a dangerous area, blues lead to relatively safe spaces, and purple means an elevator is nearby. Why 343 Industries decided to get rid of some and not others seemingly at random is beyond me, and I'm equally flabbergasted by what they did with the doors below the symbols. The green lights on either side of many doors might seem inconsequential, but they're actually really important as they map your route through the facility. If you follow them on the way in and on the way out, you should never get lost, although the fact so many people have managed to get lost regardless perhaps points to them not working quite as well as Bungie might have hoped. You can barely see the lights in the Anniversary Edition, making it difficult to easily identify where you're meant to be going. It's another aspect of the level where Anniversary's developers have fundamentally misunderstood the reason why something is the way it is. Most of what I've spoken about so far is nothing compared to what follows, however. In another large room, flood biomatter drips from the ceiling, but I wouldn't blame anyone who misses that when playing Combat Evolved Anniversary. The stains on the floor are much less pronounced, harsh green lighting makes the droplets harder to spot, and there are less of them, and even their smattering sound is all but non-existent. And it's the same story immediately after too. The grunt blood in this corridor has been hugely toned down, a gigantic misstep which means the scene fails to make anywhere near the same impression as in the original, similarly to this room where the gore and bullet holes are completely absent. What looked like a room where an intense battle may have taken place instead comes across as strange, and not in a good way, with the lack of evidence of a firefight recontextualizing things entirely. Remember that word, recontextualizing, as it will come up again in a jiffy. If there was a leaderboard for the most times someone has played through 343 Guilty Spark, I reckon I'd be somewhere near the top, and yet there's still things I somehow never noticed. This isn't specifically an anniversary edition, it's in the original Xbox edition too, but while this crazed Marine is ranting, you hear him reload despite there being no animation whatsoever.
Don't touch me, you freak! I won't be like you, I'll die first! Find your own hiding place, the monsters are everywhere!
I'm sure there's many of you wondering how I never noticed it sooner, and honestly I've asked myself the same question. Returning to the idea of 343 Industries actually recontextualizing events, even if accidentally, the lack of blood covering the area behind the Marine is one thing, but the absence of bullet holes is another entirely. This room I always loved in the original, as while there is an obvious conclusion you might jump to, if you take the time to briefly become Master Chief, crime scene investigator, you may end up with a very different view of events. The obvious answer to what happened is that the Dead Covenant were killed by Marines. The Pelican's radio message in the swamp may have said Captain Keyes had already been captured, but you saw gunfire as you reached the facilities, suggesting allies were close by. You don't know when precisely the bullet holes in the earlier room and on the wall here were created, so it's entirely possible Keyes and team could have made them, or it was the same group you almost caught a glimpse of outside. That second option wouldn't make a ton of sense though, as they would have had to have killed the same Covenant as you did to get there. None of that really adds up if you look a little closer. There are bullet holes, sure, but there's also smashed glass and bloodstains of an unknown origin opposite them, as if something broke containment. That would explain the Dead Covenant, but it wouldn't explain the bullet holes, as whatever was locked down obviously wouldn't have had weapons. Marines might have been the cause of the bullet holes, perhaps Keyes' team, but then why would they have left one of their own alive close by? It's all utterly bizarre, especially given you later find out that the bullet holes were already there when Keyes and team arrived on the scene. Chances are it was probably never intended to make much sense, and that's what makes it so unsettling. The broken glass is present in Anniversary, but evidence of a shootout isn't, with the Flood blood also far harder to spot. You might possibly come to a conclusion that the Flood broke free and massacred the Covenant, but the missing bullet holes remove an element of doubt. It all lacks nuance, basically. Reaching 343 Guilty Spark's halfway point, again there's a lack of blood by this Marine body, which is particularly infuriating given there's loads of it in the cutscene immediately after. If they were happy to include it there, then why not everywhere else? This problem is a Master Chief specific one, rather than something which can be attributed to the Anniversary Edition, but the first part of the flashback cinematic is incredibly bugged at present, as you can see here. It's time for Captain Recontextualize to step in again here, as Keyes' lack of costume change during the helmet cam footage is very stupid. In the original, he's changed into combat fatigues compared to his more formal uniform seen earlier in the campaign, which adds to his character, as it demonstrates his willingness to lead his team into danger. He remains unchanged in Anniversary, which is lazy. Also, note the lack of bullet holes here again, this time in the background. They give you information in the original. You now know for definite that it wasn't Keyes and team who created them, which makes you think further about who or what did. It's information which adds to the timeline. Here's a detail I dislike, followed directly by one I do. First, this Flood attacking Riley clearly has not been animated at all. It looks ridiculous. Second, at the beginning of the game when Keyes gives Master Chief his pistol, remember he says he doesn't keep it loaded.
I don't keep it loaded, son. You'll have to find ammo as you go.
And he clearly kept that up with its replacement, as he has to ready it when the Flood arrives.
Hold still! Hold still! Let him have it!
Of course, it's weird he wouldn't have loaded it in a situation where combat was extremely likely, they'd seen the dead elite by this point, but it's continuity nonetheless, even if it doesn't make a lot of sense. I know this video has been a lot of whinging, you might even call me something of a pedant, but I promise you I'm nearly done, although I do want to highlight a few more things before I go. Looking at the Flood themselves, visually they are okay, but the armour of what was once Marines or Elites is a bit too prominent and makes them look less disgusting than they do in the original. That being said, it does make it really obvious that the combat forms used to be humans and Elites respectively, where in the original you may not even realise, which could be seen as a positive. They also barely leave any blood splatters, which is another tragedy, as them leaving yellowy green stains everywhere really added to how disgusting they are. Granted, some of the contrast between it and the simplistic grey environment would be missing due to the anniversary's over-designed eyesores, but it's a huge loss regardless. Regarding the facility's look in general, it sticks to a theme prevalent throughout the Anniversary Edition, which is, as just mentioned, that it's horrendously over-designed. Like the swamp, everything is far too bright, and environments are also detailed to the point the visual contrast between the starkness of their rooms and corridors and the chaos which later unfolds within them is all but lost. The original is bleak and lonely, there are dark corners and badly lit areas, which adds to the feelings of isolation and terror, whereas its modern sibling is considerably more detailed, but consequently manages to somehow feel less alien as a result, in spite of the facility looking like quite the technological marvel. Other than that, all of my earlier criticisms continue to apply, with my biggest complaints again coming from the lack of Covenant and human blood used. The lack of gore around these Marines and Jackals who teamed up to fight the Flood hurts my soul, almost as much as this elevator, perhaps the best example of grossness being used to fantastic effect in the original. There, the walls are coated in Covenant blood, while in the Anniversary Edition there's basically nothing. It's a shame as it's a really important scene. You've probably just witnessed the elevator you rode in on plummet down its shaft, and so getting on this second one should initially suggest salvation until you get on it, and not only does it begin heading downwards, but you also see a shaft covered in bloodstains suggesting something far worse is waiting at the bottom. It's 343 Guilty Spark's biggest gotcha moment, and it is completely neutered in the Anniversary Edition. And that really covers all my biggest complaints, with the pushback out into the swamp being as bright and breezy as your exploration of it at the beginning of the level. It massively lacks atmosphere as you can see everything, but as it's more about straight up combat and less about developing a haunting atmosphere, it doesn't grate quite as much as when you trek through it at the beginning of the level. I wanted to make this video reasonably short and sweet, as I know negativity isn't much fun, but hopefully I've done at least a reasonable job of highlighting why the Anniversary Edition of Halo Combat Evolved's most brilliant mission fails to hit the mark in several key areas. It's still just as fun to play, but unfortunately it lacks the crushing atmosphere the original has in spades thanks to some strange choices on 343 Industries' part. If you've not tried it, hey, give it a go, you might like it. If not, then I probably wouldn't bother, as it doesn't get much better than the original. Thanks for watching the video, boys, girls and Spartans. If you had a floody good time, do consider liking, subscribing and sharing your thoughts regarding 343 Guilty Spark's Anniversary Edition, and hopefully we'll hang out again soon.